In this next session, we're going to look at a specific opportunity that we can see here in Norfolk and Suffolk around property. Many of our traditional towns and other bits of property around have been hit very hard by COVID, and in many ways the COVID recession is going to release packets of land, whether it's shops on the high street or businesses that have sadly finally closed their doors. And we've been thinking about, isn't there a way to make sure that instead of having empty space with broken windows, litter in the doorways that drags down the quality of the wider place and environment, could we use this as a moment to put together some Norfolk and Suffolk local developers, local investors, to do a post-COVID Property Regeneration Fund that might be able to move in more quickly, turn around and help with that placemaking that we just talked about in the previous session. So I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by John Howard, a property expert, developer and investor. John, welcome.
Thank you, George. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon.
In a moment, I'm just going to ask John if you could just describe your business and background and what you do. But just to set the scene for you, over the last few months, we at the Norfolk Enterprise Festival, by invitation of the Local Enterprise Partnership, have been looking at this idea. Could we maybe put together a fund that might have some council money in it, or even just councils as partners, that could help developers to go into a big site on the outskirts of a town or a small site on a high street and do something really inspiring, imaginative, that drives stronger economic regeneration? Very often in development, actually, the real issue is speed. So could we put together a fund that moves more quickly, isn't all the big volume house builders out of town, but local developers with a heartbeat in the area, and that the public sector locally could enable it to go in and do development more quickly? John, we've had a think about it. Could you just describe for everyone, first of all, what you do, your background, and then let's talk through the idea of a fund and how it might work?
Okay, so I'm been 40 years, 3,500 properties during that time, and I've got a reputation, I suppose, these days for taking on more challenging projects that perhaps some other developers would shy away from because they would consider them more risky opportunities. I try and de-risk every opportunity before I start, which does help, although, of course, every property developer, there is a risk in everything a property developer does. And you show me a property developer, George, that's never made a loss, and I'll show you a liar.
Well, very true words. John, as you look out across Norfolk and Suffolk, where do you see the real property examples? I mean, as I look, I can see bits of our high streets that are going to become available. I look at things like our social care homes and think, couldn't we be building some of those care villages with a sort of nurse at the porter's lodge, actually use some of the health technology that we're developing here in Norfolk? Maybe our railway stations. I look at them and think, so many of them have got plants growing through the windows, scrappy bits of land that no one quite knows who owns them. Couldn't we turn those into little 5G business hubs with a cafe as sort of hubs of the rural economy? But as you look, what do you think are the opportunities for us to do some fast, inspiring and regenerating property investment?
Well, George, the simpler, the better in property. It's all right being very, having all these very fancy, complicated developments, but they just take so long to do, like you said earlier. So I think we need some quick wins, and quick wins for me is where, to be fair to the government, I think over the last 2 or 3 years, they've recognised this issue, and I think they've done a great job with the PD scheme, permissive development, where you can convert offices to residential. There's virtually no way the local authority planning department can turn them down. Only on a number of 1 or 2 very small points they can turn you down on, which gives developers the confidence and investors the confidence to crack on. Because the smaller developer, don't forget, George, it's not like the big boys. We need to know, we can't take the huge risks of buying a property not knowing whether you're going to get planning or not. So the PD, where they've got 56 days, the council, to come back and say yay or nay, and they've virtually got to say yes, to be honest with you. They don't like it. The planning I can tell you now, George, that there isn't one planning officer in Norfolk or Suffolk that like PD, because they've lost complete control, and the control has been given into the hands of the developers, really, to a great extent. But however, the new PDs, which are coming out shortly, or have just come out 1st of September, they give the council a lot more control over the new permitted developments. Unlike officers, they've got office to residential, they have got more control. So I think we need to look for some simple, quick wins to start with. And they would be basically turning what was quite often, and this is what always frustrated me, George, over the years, where you've got a property that at one time was a house, then became a commercial shop, and then you are refused planning to turn it back into a residential. And part of that is to do with rates, because commercial rates are higher than residential rates, and the councils are always wanting rates money, always. And I think at last, the penny has finally dropped that you don't need so many shops in town centres or pubs, and they are at last looking to be more proactive and more supportive. But they could still be a lot more supportive and proactive as far as I'm concerned.
Got it. Thank you. So I hear you loud and clear. Strong message on, look, the quick wins would be turning redundant space that could be good residential space. That's where we've got a big shortage. Make that transition.
Absolutely.
And I know in many of our towns, there are obvious sites where you'd look and say, well, instead of one charity shop and an empty building above it, why don't we turn it into 8 flats or 10 flats? And that would provide very affordable accommodation for many people who are on the housing waiting list. Very straightforward.
Very straightforward. I do appreciate that, a shop front is not attractive to residential, and that needs to be changed. And that's one of the issues in the past where planners haven't wanted the shop fronts to be changed. They say, well, you can change it to residential, but you've got to leave the shop front. Well, it's just ridiculous, George. Yep. They've really got to be sensible. And also, and quite often the shop front may be an extension at the front. So you can take the single story extension down to create front gardens. We do want houses of quality here. We don't want to just be doing what I call second rate bodge job type of development. Just because the building is old and has challenges doesn't mean it can't be attractive. And I think it's so important. And I'm very passionate about brownfield sites, George, because at the end of the day, if we built on all our brownfield sites, we'd hardly have to build on any new greenfield sites. And in the past, the difficulty with the brownfield sites has been archaeological digs, demolition. All these things are unknowns to a developer. And I think a lot of the funding that is being given in many ways to these town centres and local authorities actually has been reinvested in a way. I think some of these sites should have been bought or a grant available to clean these sites up in order to make them what I call oven ready. I don't like that term, but oven ready for a developer to come in and do, because none of these developers can afford to take the risks involved in buying a site, not knowing whether there's asbestos, not knowing whether it needs an archaeological dig that can be very, very expensive, and not knowing what the ground conditions are. So there is a huge opportunity here for all local authorities via funding and via what we're talking about, George, hopefully some sort of, funding from the government in order to clean these sites up and make them developable. Because at the moment, a lot of them are standing redundant and they're not going to be done because of the cost of cleaning them up, as it were.
So, John, we've a very clear message, and that's why at the heart of this idea of a post-COVID regeneration fund here in Norfolk, the idea is basically the councils don't necessarily have to put in a huge amount of money. They haven't got it. But government money could go into dealing with clearing up the site, getting it build ready, so that take out the risk for you guys as developers that you're not going to discover. But also, if the councils were stakeholders, partners, then they're perfectly at liberty to give you fast track planning permission as part of a post-COVID regeneration, reduces the time cost of money. Actually, there is a lot of money, isn't there, for development. If we could de-risk it and speed it up and make it easier for you, there's a lot of money that would like to invest in property in East Anglia, isn't there?
what shocks and amazes me is the amount of money available out there from private investors, and also for potential new developers and investors who want to get into property and want to make it a full-time profession. And I'm delighted that there's so many people, and a lot of women, which is brilliant, because in the past we definitely have not had enough ladies involved in property. So I'm delighted to be helping some of these people. And absolutely, there's plenty of money out there. Funding the money to develop projects is not, there is no shortage of it. What there's a shortage of is risk money. So risk money where people are not sure what's going to happen and won't take that risk. And you can understand why they won't. The banks won't take the risk, that's for sure. And most private investors can't afford to take the risk. So I think there is a marriage here, George, and I'm excited by the fact that I think the local authorities now are much more proactive than they ever been in the past. They realise there's an issue and a problem. And I don't think it matters, and I don't care whether I'm dealing with a Liberal council, a Labour council or Conservative council. It doesn't matter, and it should not matter. This is far too serious to be political. We need to all get together and throw in our hats and say, come on, let's roll our sleeves up and let's make this happen. And over the years, the one thing I've managed to do, my wife says, I haven't got, the one ability I have got seems to be, is to make things happen. I do a lot of dedication and I surround myself with a lot of people a lot better than me, but making it happen is so hard, George, on these sites. And there's so much negativity and so slow, and that's the problem.
So can I just pick up this sort of central theme of today's Restart event, John, that there might be an opportunity in the challenge of COVID. Yes, there'll be bankruptcies, and yes, sadly, there are going to be job losses. But maybe this is an opportunity for us to, here in rural East Anglia, to recognise that we've got a big opportunity. We are, in most parts, we should be about an hour, not much more than an hour from Cambridge, with a huge opportunity for that cluster of little businesses, often 2, 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 people looking for quite small premises, but they want to be connected. The theme of this two-day festival, now digital, and the Norfolk Way project that I set up and we're now linking with Suffolk is, could we not drive a vision of development here which supports more people working from home, small businesses in converted farm buildings, towns as 21st century digitally connected hubs for people to work from home but have a decent pub lunch, have a decent business meeting, have some hospitality, make the towns places for leisure, places that if you ran your own business and have a young family, you can live a high quality of life. If we think of that, where would you say there are some interesting property opportunities, not just for large scale housing, but creative placemaking? And if councils wanted to make it easier for developers like you, enlightened local developers, what are the things that you'd be encouraging them to look at in order to help drive that sort of rural renaissance?
Well, I'm unique in a way, probably, to some people, because I've got a foot in all three camps. So I was director of Cambridge United Football Club for 18 years, so I know all about Cambridge. I've got a businesses in Norfolk with Farm & Country, our estate agency, and obviously I'm based and developing Ipswich and all over East Anglia. So I've got quite a broad spectrum of it all, and I think you can always learn from other people who have been successful and already done this. So I would certainly, you've got to look at Cambridge and how Cambridge has been so successful. And of course, there is now a wave out of Cambridge, to these, especially Norfolk. I mean, the A11 now, it's all dual carriageway, it's fantastic. And it's opened up so much. And in the last 6 months, I believe, George, we've come forward 10 years. I think people are confident of being able to work from home now. They've realised what they've been doing, travelling too much, the quality of life, seeing their kids more. And I honestly believe now that we in Suffolk and Norfolk have the most enormous potential. I think house prices will rise. That may not be good news for everybody. I accept that, because I think what's going to happen is people are going to value their lifestyle far more than they have done, having been locked down for 6 months. And we're seeing in Norfolk and Suffolk, huge people want to move to the area. And those people that move to this area will be entrepreneurs. There'll be people with money as well. So combine that with the people already here, and we've got some very interesting and talented people in Suffolk and Norfolk. I think they're going to start these businesses or move these businesses, absolutely right. And it's been happening already, I know, and a lot of farmers have been very entrepreneurial and having, you know, in these model farms, they've been doing offices and all cafes and nurseries and all sorts of things. And I think that will continue, but at a much faster pace. And I think also the government planning new rules, which have made it easier for barns to be converted in, you know, agricultural barns to be converted into residential and other sort of farm buildings will make a huge difference. And I think no doubt there'll be grants. I do say farmers always do seem to manage to get grants better than everyone else, George, but we won't go into that. But I do think that there'll be even more grants available for farms to diversify into these different types of businesses, and rightly so. And I think the quality of life we have in Suffolk and Norfolk, you know, is so strong, and it's such a great message. And I think most places will benefit from this if they're smart. And I know every town has probably a very good residential area and a slightly weaker one. I understand that. Ipswich, Norwich, Cambridge, doesn't matter where you go, everyone's got a weaker and a stronger area, same across the country. And it's a micro property market. No market is the same as another. But I do think that every town in this country, and especially Norfolk and Suffolk, have huge opportunities, but they need to grab it. And the ones that will grab it will be successful. The ones who sit there faffing around thinking about it for 2 or 3 years won't be.
Very clear message. As you look at that, I mean, I dream of sort of in 10 years, Norfolk and Suffolk being, you know, hugely prosperous. The deprivation in coastal towns like Yarmouth and Lowestoft and bits of Ipswich and rural deprivation, a thing of the past. The technology and the small company revolution hasn't just created jobs for boffins and millionaires, but jobs for everyone in the supply chain, warehouses, forklift drivers, secretary, the whole supply chain. And I think we could have an economy where many fewer people are having to commute like cattle in overpacked trains or on overpacked roads to London or the big cities, and more people are able to work closer to home. In order to make that happen, I'm very struck that here in Norfolk, it's the same in Suffolk, I know, where we see a lot of huge house building by the big boys, the Persimmons, and based on very high car usage on the outskirts of villages that are dying, based on everybody using their cars to drive long distance. Part of what we're thinking in this local regeneration fund is that it would have more local developers with a feel for places like, you know, Watton or Woodbridge, who are actually committed to the quality of life in that place. If we were to go down that road, what do you think would be the key to getting a Norfolk and Suffolk regeneration fund to help with placemaking that developers would say, we want to be in, we want to be part of it? I'm assuming it would be the councils all on board, bit of fast track planning, some capital for de-risking the sites, and a bit of imaginative planning permission if you wanted to put a care home on the end of a high street so that the elderly can actually access facilities, that we can make it happen. But what else for you would be the keys to making something like that succeed?
I think young people are the key here. Young people, because young people want to live in the towns. So normally, you know, as you get older, you get children, you want bigger gardens and you want to move out of town probably. Same with London, I appreciate. So I think the young people in these towns have got a huge role to play. And I think these towns will become, I wouldn't say villages because they're in towns, but I think you know what I mean. If you look at some good examples, I was in King's Cross the other day in London, and although you're in central London there's an area there where they've developed an area next to the canal, and it's like being in a village. And I think that type of quality development doesn't have to cost a fortune. And if there is problems and challenges with the development, then it can be subsidised. And I think through this grant, hopefully, and I think you're better off to subsidise a little bit and support the developer and make something better than make it better than let the developer cut corners and make it poor. And I think of less quality. And I think that's really important. So I think we really need to think about young people and old people. I think the people in the middle, I like to think of myself in the middle, George, and you're younger than me, but in the middle, we probably are going to live out of town, probably, with families and so on. But certainly for the older generation and the younger generation, there has to be, that's where it's going to make a difference to them. And we need to ask them, what do they want in these towns? What do you require? Do you require a cinema? Do you require, there'll be coffee shops and so on, and what other shops do you require? We don't want you getting in your car and driving to out of town stores. We want to try and create less shops. But of course, the great thing is, if you have less, you do create some competition for these retail units. The problem is there's just too many of them. So if you cut them down by, say, half, I think you've got to be brave here and say, right, what we're going to do over time, this side of the street is going to be decamped, it's going to become residential. And that way you will create some demand for these shops, because there'll be a lot more people living in the centre of these towns, a lot more people, and they will be spending money. And I just think, we've got some tough decisions to make. We've got some challenges to overcome, and there'll be pain, like with anything, with any change, there'll be pain before it gets better. And the pain will be seeing these shops as we are now boarded up, and if you're a landlord, it's all very well saying, oh, well, you're a landlord, so what? Well, if you're a commercial landlord and you've lost your tenant, you're now paying empty rates. So maybe there's a way where we could support the landlord, and if they want to change it into residential, support them with regards to getting rid of the rates while it's empty and this type of thing. Support, we've all got to support each other in this, George, to make it happen. It's no good just saying, oh, well, it's not our problem.
You make a really interesting point, I think, about the demographics, the age profile. I grew up in just outside Newmarket, and in Cambridgeshire and Norfolk. All my life has been in East Anglia. And I remember as a boy, the railway was empty. Nobody went on the railway. Everyone, very few people, the odd students, kids like me, but they weren't. Cambridge Station was basically empty when I was a boy. Yeah. And I'm very interested now, you look, and today's sort of under 25s, you mentioned King's Cross, Cambridge Station now is like a city of its own. And when you talk to today's under 25s, setting off, starting a career, starting a family, many of them are not car hungry at all. They view the car as a slightly weird relic, or something they might have to have, but they'd rather not. Yeah. Whereas for my generation, it was your wheels was your liberty. Many of them are on bicycles.
That was everything, George. Everything. Yeah. A car was everything, wasn't it?
Many of them are on bicycles. Many of them live in Cambridge in, as you say, that village of sort of Norwegian flats near the station. Yeah. Very high density, very attractive. And they're very happy taking a fast train down to London for a night out, or getting on their bikes and coming up to, I think, Thetford, Attleborough, Wymondham, and going off for 3 hours with a cycle app, Discovery, family on a bike. But I'm very struck that when you talk to the parish councils and the residents groups in my towns and do long-term town planning, God bless them, they all tend to be over 70. Yeah, and they all tend to be thinking about what the town was like when they were young. Yes. And the sort of 25-year-old Scandinavian Nordic cycling entrepreneurs of Cambridge today are an alien species. And I think you make a really interesting point that we've got to get a younger voice into this regeneration space.
It's so important, George. It's so important. I talk to my stepchildren, my stepdaughters. And they're in their 20s now. But I sound like a dinosaur to them. And my ideas and what I do and what I want to do are totally different, alien to what they want to do. So you're absolutely right. And on the planning committees, we need young people. We need to try and encourage and embrace young people and get them more engaged, because they are the future. We are not the future. They are the future, and they're the ones who are going to make these towns thrive.
Great point. Couple of minutes left. I can't help but I want to ask you about sort of bigger East Anglia infrastructure. We all know that successive governments for the last 30 years haven't been building enough houses. Those of us who live in villages and have seen sort of 200 houses on the outskirts with no infrastructure reel in horror at the sort of numbers that government's talking about. But my own view is that if we built the infrastructure properly, put the housing in the right place and made it look like it's contributing to the existing landscape, then it might not be so opposed. But to get the numbers, we're going to have to build some quite big places. I keep looking at somewhere like Mildenhall or Lakenheath on the Cambridge-Norwich Railway, an air base coming up. It used to be grade 1 peat, it's now grade 3 clay. It's 5-10 miles from the A11. And I keep thinking, why don't we create a East Anglian A11 Development Company Corporation, buy the land at agricultural value, build a 50,000 house new town with green technology, water recycling. I mean, put it on the railway, take some of the profit from the land. 200 million would electrify the Cambridge-Norwich Railway and put everywhere within 50 minutes of Cambridge. Do you see enough?
It would, but you keep mentioning Cambridge, not Ipswich. So
well, we'd link Cambridge, Norwich and Ipswich.
Absolutely. So the biggest problem is they've done it. The whole thing's is back to front. So the first thing, surely, you should be putting the infrastructure in, and then saying now we can build 500 houses or 1,000 houses. And what's happening is the houses are getting planning first, basically, and then they go, oh, what about the roads? You know, it's totally the wrong way round. And you're absolutely right. Mildenhall around there, I've thought a long time, why on earth isn't that, new towns is really what, is what we, I suppose, garden cities, is that the new terminology? I'm not sure, but you would have thought, but of course, the government do think that the A14 finishes at Cambridge.
Yeah, I know.
They don't realise it comes down to Felixstowe, which, by the way, is about one of the most important ports in the world. They seem to think that it finishes at Cambridge, and this is the difficulty we have in Suffolk, certainly.
I understand. You will have noticed when I was Minister for the Future Transport, I managed to agree that the Oxford to Cambridge Railway will go through to Ipswich and Norwich. Absolutely. So there we are. Listen, our time is up. John, can I thank you very much for doing what you do, but also for your help on this idea of a Norfolk and Suffolk Regeneration Fund. If any of you are interested, I'm working with the LEP on the project with John and 10 or 15 other local developers and investors. This is an idea of a local project to help support faster, quicker, better local regeneration property investment in Norfolk and Suffolk, so that we can make the COVID crisis actually a catalyst for more enhanced placemaking and recovery, for a more entrepreneurial rural renaissance in this beautiful part of the world. So if you'd like to find out more, please contact us at the Norfolk Enterprise Festival or at the LEP. And if you'd like to get involved, we'd be delighted to work with you. Thank you for your support. Stay tuned, because our next session is very exciting. We're introducing the Magnificent Seven, the Norfolk Enterprise Festival's leaders of the 7 highest sectors. Stay with us for the next bit.